why do I buy and sell properties in a few different areas versus just picking one area? Well, you're going to learn all that on today's topic on this week's REI Weekly Lesson. If you're not familiar with me, my name is Greg Helbeck. I've been a full-time real estate entrepreneur now for almost a decade. I've done well over 250 houses, and my company, Velocity House Buyers, buys and sells around 50 to 60 properties a year. And we do them mostly all off market. I have a handful of rental properties. So the reason I'm mentioning that is because everything you're going to listen to on this podcast is from real world experience. So if you get value from this show or any other show you listen to, if you could do me a favor and leave us a review on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you're listening, or if you're watching this on YouTube, if you can do me a favor and like the video and subscribe to the channel. That's how we keep growing this show on a weekly basis. So today's topic is, why am I in multiple markets? Why don't I just pick one market and go deep in that area? And hopefully by the end of this, you're going to understand why we do it as a company, and depending on your situation, why it might benefit you. So the first thing that I got to mention, as you probably see in my hat, I'm a New York guy. I grew up in New York and my business is headquartered out of New York. And if you're familiar with New York, very difficult to do real estate transactions in, mainly because you have to get a seller's attorney and a buyer's attorney involved and a lender's attorney. And the whole transaction, because of all the attorneys, takes a very long time. A quick wholesale deal takes usually 2 to 3 months, which is crazy because in other areas I do business in, it takes 2 to 3 weeks. And the reason it takes a long time is because you got to get 4 lawyers to agree on one deal. So because of that, the cash conversion cycle, which just means that the time it takes from when you spend money in marketing till you actualize your revenue, is like double or triple in New York State. So it takes a really long time to see revenue turn into liquidity, and it causes big cash flow issues. And the main reason I invest in Seattle, where I live, and also in Delaware, where my partner Brett lives, is not only do we both live there, but you don't have to deal with attorneys to close deals necessarily like you do in New York. So in Delaware, there's a closing attorney, but they have no say in the deal. All they do is do the paperwork. You could put $1 down. You could put no deposit down. They don't care. They don't represent anybody. All they do is facilitate the transaction. They're basically like a title company. Seattle, you don't even have lawyers for the most part. It's all done through title and escrow. Therefore, you can get deals done in Delaware and Seattle if there's clear title in 5 to 7 days, right? That's how long it takes for a title report to come back. There's no title issues. You can close that fast, especially if the house is vacant. So it's amazing. New York, different story. You got to basically get a seller's attorney involved. You got to get your attorney involved. Their attorney has to send your attorney a contract. Your attorney reviews the contract, sends it to you. You got to send them a deposit, and they got to send it to the other attorney. It's a complete disaster, and it takes so freaking long. Like there's a deal that we're closing probably later this week or next week. We got it in contract, I think July 1st, and it's September 3rd, the time of this recording. And that'll be a quick wholesale deal. That'll be about 2 months. And that's, still way longer than most areas. So because our business has a considerable amount of overhead with salaries and marketing and software and subscriptions, I need to be in other areas to where I can get properties under contract and sell them fast so we can keep the cash flow consistent so we have enough money to pay our bills. If I just relied on New York revenue, I would have these great spikes in income, but because it takes so long with all these attorneys to get involved, I just get murdered in terms of cash flow. So the reason I like to do the multiple markets is to offset my New York cash flow issue. So that's point number one. If you're watching this or listening to this and you're in New York State, if you're not at the level that I'm at with the volume and the team size and the overhead, it's really not a big deal, right? Like I have friends who do very well and they don't have really much overhead. So they could stick around these crazy cash flow cycles and it doesn't impact them. But if they hired a team and they had overhead, they would definitely be in multiple markets. So if you're listening to this and you want to build a decent size operation and you're in the state of New York, I highly recommend you to go into another market, mainly to offset your cash issues. So that's the first reason. The second reason I invest out of state is because not only does it insulate me to local economies, it also allows me to test my marketing out in different ways. For example, marketing we do in New York might not work that well in Delaware, and then marketing we do in Delaware might not work that well in New York. But because I'm in different areas, I can test out my marketing and see what message and medium resonates with a certain demographic of people in a certain area. So I'll give you a great example on this. Pay-per-click marketing, for some reason, in 2024, was atrocious in Delaware. But in New York, it worked a little bit better. So the fact that we're in multiple markets gave me some good data. I'm like, wow, PPC really, well, it stunk across the board, but it was much worse in Delaware than it was in New York. And, if I wasn't in two areas, I wouldn't have known that information. Same thing with direct mail. Direct mail works a lot better in New York than it does in Delaware. And the direct mail in Seattle, out of all places, has been pretty strong as well. You'd think it'd be the opposite. You think direct mail would be really hard in New York and really hard in Seattle, which it is, but it's very hard in Delaware. I don't know what it is with Delaware, but we've gotten like one deal from direct mail all year long that came from mailers. You think Delaware is cheaper, less sophisticated, this, that, and the other. Doesn't work that well in Delaware. But on the other hand, when we used to do text messaging, it would work a lot better in Delaware compared to New York, which is interesting. That's why I wouldn't know that unless I was in multiple markets. Same thing with initially mailing niche lists. So let's say you pull a brand new niche list, tax delinquent, foreclosure, whatever. I have found that in Delaware, when we first mail a niche list, the response is better there than it is in New York, but it seems to drop off once we start mailing it multiple times in Delaware. Compared to New York, it does the opposite. It works even better. So the more we mail in New York in terms of repetitions and multiple drops to the same list, it works a lot better in New York compared to Delaware. It seems to be like the first few drops are good and then it starts to really taper off. Same with letters, right? Letters work a little bit better in Seattle than they do compared to New York. And I think the reason for that is that Seattle has a little bit more sophisticated seller profile. There's a little bit more money in the Seattle area compared to the Hudson Valley. I think people up here in Seattle are a little bit more open to getting a letter and being more formal about things versus in New York. So this is why I like being in multiple markets. And then one more thing I'll mention, point number 3. When you're in multiple markets, you are ultimately able to make more money because there's more people who you can partner with, right? I always say, and I'll say it right now, if you're in New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Seattle, Reno, if you're in one of those areas, you got a property you either want to wholesale to me or wholesale with me, I can actually get that deal done with you if it's a deal. Everywhere I've always lived, I've always done business there. And as I start to summarize this show up, I want to make one more point, and I want you to really take this to heart because this is where I see a lot of people fail, is they think it's cool to go in multiple markets. They think it's cool to tell people. They go to a mastermind, I'm in multiple markets and blah, 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 blah. And that doesn't mean crap unless you're actually making money in multiple markets. The only reason I'm really in multiple markets is because New York is our core market and there's crazy cash flow issues there because of how long it takes to close deals with attorneys. And if that wasn't the case, I'd probably just be in New York. So if you're going to go into multiple markets, make sure you do it for the right reasons, not to tell your friends you're so cool and you're so good at making money. That's not the right reason. The right reason is cash flow issues, diversifying the market, being able to do more deals. But the key that I tell people, the only reason I've gotten really good at that is because the areas that I'm in, I know extremely well, and there's only 3 of them really. So I do it strategically. I'm not just like randomly waking up one day and saying, I want to go invest in Oklahoma City. Oh, let's go invest in Tempe, Arizona. Let's go to Bismarck, North Dakota. I don't do that, right? I don't think that's a good strategy. Also, if you're going to be in multiple markets, make sure you have multiple exit strategies. I have multiple ways to monetize my leads versus if I was just a wholesaler, it would be hard to really do extremely well if you were just assigning contracts. Because I'll tell you right now, there's a lot of deals that we do as a company that don't make any sense as a wholesale. It's not an easy market. This is not 2015 when I got started where you could send 500 mailers out and get a deal. We got to send like 15,000 to get a deal. It's a different market. So you got to be that much better. Hopefully this was a really informative podcast. And I'm telling you right now, if it comes to virtual investing, I've been doing this for a very long time. I know what to do, what not to do. How do you get boots on the ground? How do you really understand a market? So if you need help with that, reach out to me. And if you got a deal, of course, reach out to me. I'm an open book. And hopefully this message added some value in your life. And I'll see you on the next podcast. Take care, everybody.